In the last video, we took a look at the response object that is generated by Express. Now, keeping in mind that that response object is a JSON representation or a JavaScript object representation of the actual HTTP response that came into our Express application via the web server. Now with that, because the response object is the object that will contain what we want sent back to the user, we're going to go ahead and focus on how do we build responses that go back to the user and how do we make sure that the proper data is sent, as well as that we are identifying what type of data is being sent to the user. Now by default, inside of our requests here, if we look at our products router, we've got ourselves the root URL, we've got ourselves a get on a particular product ID, and then we have ourselves an update on a product of a particular ID. And now what we're going to do is we are going to show how these different responses can send back different data and what the responses look like in the client browser when the client gets the response back. So let's go ahead and open up a terminal, and then we're going to go ahead and use npm start. And since we modified that to use Neumont, this means anytime we make modifications to our source files, and Neumont's going to go ahead and restart the app for us so that we don't have to sit and mess with starting and stopping. All right. Now we've already got this get right here, which in a traditional API, a get without an ID right here means that we're going to pull back the entire collection of products. So this being the products router, this would potentially, if we implemented it with a database behind it, would return an entire collection of products. Now we're going to go ahead and mock this up really quick. I'm going to go ahead and cut out this mock data we've got right here. And we're going to go ahead and just for now, we're going to create ourselves a mock piece of data that we'll be passing back for all of these requests right now since we haven't hooked this up to a database yet. So I'm going to go ahead and do a to-do note for us. Need to implement the database and data model. And then we're going to go ahead and add another to-do. And we're going to say remove mock objects once database is active. And then we're going to go ahead and put our fake data here. So const, and we're just going to call it dummy data so we know exactly what it is. And then we'll paste that object back in there. Now with this dummy data, we're going to go ahead and we're going to pass back what would be expected from these endpoints. So here, we're going to go ahead and send back this dummy data object. And for the put, we're going to send back this dummy data object. And then for our get, since we said it would be sending back an entire collection of these particular product objects, then we're going to go ahead and send it back in the form of an array. So I'm going to wrap everything within an array. So this is an array literal with a single item inside of it, and the rest of these are just single items. Now one thing that we had here was in our index, we used the response.render, which used the Jade rendering engine or view engine to take our, if we look here in our view folders, to take our layout as well as the partial that we have here, this index, and then build our HTML dynamically. And right here we're actually putting in this thing called title, and it's Tim's app. Well, if we're going to do, and we want to see what might happen when we render data inside of our responses, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go ahead and take this dummy data just for now, just for fun, so that we can see how this all works. I'm going to go ahead and put this in here as dummy data. And then here inside of index, I'm going to go ahead and add an additional parameter called products. And then here, we're going to send back an array of our dummy data. And of course, that's only got one item in it. And then we can go to our index page right here and our actual index view, which is in Jade right here. And we've got our welcome title. And then we could do something down here where we output the actual product, and we're just going to keep it simple. I'm just going to go ahead and do div equals, and then I'm just going to go ahead and put I believe we called it products. So I'm going to have it pass back this products object and just stuff that into the div. And we're just going to see what it looks like. It's not going to be well formatted. If we were implementing this for Rails, we would, of course, since this is an array, we would iterate over that array and we would have some kind of partial HTML that would render each one individually and make it look pretty. But right now, we're just going to go ahead and stick with that. And here we have our render, which means we're going to send back full-blown HTML. And then our products here, we've got ourselves a send, and we've been using send, but we also have JSON here. So we're going to look at the difference between a send and a JSON and what our response looks like inside of our user's browser. So let's go ahead and open up a browser here, and then let's make sure that we can get to our website. So we're going to go localhost 3000, and here's our website right here, localhost 3000, and you can see the JavaScript printed out as object. That's because the .toString function of a JavaScript object was called, and that's what gets printed out. If we wanted to make it a little bit more readable, we could just right here in our Jade say products, and then at the first product in the index, we could then go ahead and call, what's the first property? We could just go ahead and do name, save that, come back, reload, and we can see football right here. Awesome. So now, let's look at our response here. We did this a little bit in a previous video, but we can see that we got full-blown HTML. And then if we want to go ahead and look at the network, refresh our page, pull this up, look at this actual request here, and we can go ahead and look at our headers. And here's the response headers. And we can see the headers that are right here. We've got the connection keep alive, we've got the date, the E tag, and the application that actually produced this response and sent it to us. We can view the source and see what it actually looks like in HTTP 1.1 header format right there. Now let's go ahead and let's see what happens when we call one of these, and let's look and see what the headers look like. And let's call just our list of objects first. So let's do our /products. And of course, we got back the JSON object. It's an array of JSON objects. We only have one in the array. And so if we look here at our actual request, we can look at our response headers, and we see that because we passed back JavaScript, well, a JavaScript object right here in our dummy data, an array of JavaScript objects, the thing about Express is that it was smart enough to go ahead and set the content type to application/JSON. If we went ahead and removed this and we put this back to a string, this is just a string, so plain text, and we saved that, we come back, we reload the page, click on our products, and now we come down here and we look at the content type. You can see that Express dynamically changed the content type from application JSON to text HTML. Now it's really cool that Express has the ability to go ahead and make those changes for us so that we don't have to be super explicit in the response types that we do. Now, sometimes we want to be super specific, or we want to receive some extra functionality that a built-in function that Express has provides for us. And that's where the difference between send and JSON comes in. Now if we go ahead and reload this, reload the page again, look at this products, we can see that of course the content type is application JSON, and Express handled that for us. Now if we call this one by using the route /123 on our products, and we do 1, 2, 3, hit enter, go back up, click on our request, and then we come down here and we look at our, and you can see it is application JSON. So you might ask yourself, well, why use JSON when send does the exact same thing? And that is because the JSON function that is a wrapper around the normal send function actually does provide you with some additional JSON logic that you can use to modify what is passed in here. And if you go to the Express API documentation and you look up the difference between send and JSON, you'll be able to see what it does for you. Now, we're not going to go over that in the video because we're mostly just focusing on the fact that we can build responses and send them back to the user. And we can do that with these different methods, right? Render, send, and then our JSON. Well, another cool thing that we can do with our responses is that we can actually modify the headers that go back with these responses. So these are the headers that came back to the browser. And sometimes, especially when we're working with an API like we started to build out here in our demo, is that we may need to send back like a token ID for our authentication so that the server knows who we are. So we might need to send back that token authentication. We might also need to specifically set the content type on the request if we're not sending JSON or we're not sending regular HTML or text. And we might also need to specify our status code that we're sending back to the user. And the way we do that is we simply use the HTTP header types, which if we look right here in our browser, and I'm here on the MDM, so Mozilla Developer Network, and if you look up HTTP headers, you can see all the different headers that we can use inside of our response that we send back to the caller or to the client. And there's a lot to choose from. All of them have specific things that they do and information that they provide to the user. The cool thing though is that we can actually go ahead and add our own headers to our responses. And we can do that. So right now it looks like, let's go back to our browser. We're using the /123 path, so we'll go back to this route right here. And we can go ahead and modify the headers by using response.set. And then we can specify the header that we want to put in there. Now sometimes we version our API, so sometimes we'll want to go ahead and specify certain information about the particular response that's coming back. And when we're on the client side, we'll want to, of course, send the version of the API we want to use, as well as the token and all that kind of stuff. So let's pretend for a minute, and we're just pretending that this is, actually we can do this right here. Well, let's do it in the user so that we're not just really pretending. We're just going to go ahead and mock up the user here. So we've got a /user. So let's go ahead and let's call that really quick. Instead of products, let's call users. And here we get respond with a resource. And then when we look at its headers, it is regular text. And the text that came back was this right here that was in our response.send. Now let's pretend that we have a login. So let's go ahead and go down here. And let's just go ahead and call this login. And let's pretend that this is a login function. And so let's put a note in here just so that we know that we actually are getting this method firing for a get with the /login as the path after our user's path. And let's say hit login handler. And let's go back, refresh. Oh, we need to add /login as our path. All right, hit the login handler. Now let's pretend that we have a database set up and that the person passed us, or the client passed us, the username and password. And we looked up the user, we found out that they're a valid user, and we generated an authentication token for that user. Well, we can set the response header and actually send that token back to the user. And we would do that through response.set. And then we would give it a header. And let's say that the header we're going to do is going to be token. Oh, let's do token -auth to follow the actual header type. And most headers, of course, are capitalized. Oops. So we're going to do token auth. And then the value that we want passed to it is going to be right here. And let's say that it's some kind of a crazy, authentication token. And now when we call this login, we should see an additional header to what we saw before that now has the auth token in it. So let's go ahead and reload the page, go to login, and then let's go down here and look at our response headers, and you can see our custom auth token header was actually added to the response before it was sent to the client. Well, with that, We can now pass back information through the HTTP headers to the client, and we can add custom headers to all of the responses we send back. With that, we have a little bit better understanding of how we can send responses back to our users, how we can modify or add headers to our responses when we need to, and we can use the different types of responses like send, JSON, and then render if we're going to use a view engine to compile HTML dynamically. We'll call that good right now on sending responses back to the user. And make sure you dive into the documentation, make sure you fully understand how response works and the different methods render, send, and JSON.